On Monday, April 24, 2023, the committee is meeting on the study of federal government consulting contracts awarded to McKinsey and Company and pursuant to Standing Order 111.11. The order of reference from the House of Wednesday, June 7, 2023, and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, June 19, 2023. The committee is also meeting to consider the nomination of Harriet Solloway for the position of the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner. Colleagues and witnesses, please note, a reminder not to put earpieces next to the microphones as it causes feedback and potential injury, apparently worse in this room than the others, so please be aware. In accordance with our routine motion, I'm informing the committee that all witnesses appearing by video conference have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. We have 3 opening statements, a short one from our law clerk, and then we will go to Mr. Shea and then Mr. Dermarkar. So, Mr. Bédard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You asked me to explain and clarify the right of the House and its committee to send for papers and records. So this right to send for papers and records is one of the parliamentary privilege that the House of Commons and its committees have. This power is constitutional in nature, and it is subject to the only limitation that Parliament, the House, or the committees will impose on themselves. When requesting documents, sometimes committee may be faced with a confidentiality claim. In such circumstances, the committee may decide to put measures in place to protect the sensitive information, may decide no longer to insist on its production order, or may decide to insist on its production order and insist on the production of documents unredacted. Ultimately, it's for the committee to decide what is the option it wants to choose.
Thank you, Mr. Bédard. Mr. Shea.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Hello, Mr. Chair and members of the committee.
The Council Office to return to provide you with further information and respond to your questions about the government's response to the motion for the production of documents concerning contracts awarded by McKinsey and Company. My name is Matthew Shea, and I'm the Assistant Secretary to the Cabinet, Ministerial Services and Corporate Affairs at the Privy Council Office. I would like to keep my opening remarks short to allow greater time for questions. I also delivered opening remarks when I last appeared before this committee on June 5th, 2023, that can be referenced. The Privy Council Office understands and respects the role of Parliament in holding government to account and is committed to providing information to parliamentarians in a transparent manner. As has been the approach of successive governments, we must balance this commitment to transparency with the need to maintain the confidentiality of certain types of information. Nous sommes heureux de pouvoir collaborer avec le comité.
We are happy to be working with parliamentary committees in order to explore ways in which we can balance these 2 priorities and share information.
The Privy Council Office issued one sole source non-competitive contract to McKinsey in 2017 in the amount of $24,747 during the period for which the records were requested. The Privy Council Office submitted all its documents in both official languages on February 22, 2023. Of the 280 pages submitted, redactions remain in only 2 paragraphs that relate to cabinet confidence. Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et
Mr. Chair, committee members, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you again today. I look forward to answering your questions once again today alongside my colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Shea. Mr. Dermarkar, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hang on. Bonjour à tous. Je m'appelle.
Hello, everyone. My name is Fred Mercar, and I am the president of Atomic Energy Canada, a Crown corporation that works to promote Canada's interests thanks to science and innovation in the field of nuclear and for the environment. We work at the Chalk River Lab, and we develop CANDU nuclear reactors, rather. Today, we are a lean and flat Crown corporation that works with the private sector to achieve our mandate. We also work with the private sector, as I said.
Zero emissions by 2050, which requires all solutions, including nuclear technologies. AECL is investing ways to apply nuclear technologies to help achieve Canada's goals, including CANDU reactor technology, which has proven itself as one of the top-performing reactor technologies in the world today, as well as small modular reactors. Our recent work with McKinsey analyzed the potential role of nuclear and compared different reactor systems, including our very own CANDU reactors. The report prepared by McKinsey has been used to inform AECL's strategic plan and future work in support of the government's objectives to achieve net zero by 2050. This report underlined the significant potential for nuclear technology, and particularly CANDU technology, to address Canada's climate change goals, in the context of a focus on energy security, supply chain resilience, and economic development. Nuclear energy not only advances climate goals and provides energy security, it contributes to Canada's GDP and employment. Le secteur nucléaire canadien.
The nuclear sector in Canada today accounts for 76,000 jobs across Canada and adds $17 billion per year to Canada's GDP. We can leverage decades of investment in CANDU technology and intellectual property, create intellectual, economic, and energy security benefits for Canada, position the innovative next-generation CANDU for export, and cement Canada's leadership in an area that is critical to our future prosperity.
Je suis disponible pour répondre.
I am available to answer any questions that the committee may have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sir, we'll start our first round with Mr. Barrett for 6 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. My first question is to Mr. Bédard. Is there a limit on or a legal restriction as determined by Canadian courts on the power of parliamentary committees to order the production of papers?
Courts have recognized the existence of the power to send for records and papers, and in the parliamentary privilege jurisprudence, they have recognized that the exercise of the privilege itself, it's not something that is subject to court scrutiny. So the manner in which the privilege is exercised is for Parliament alone to decide, and in recognizing the power to send for records and papers, they haven't set any limit to this privilege.
Okay. So how would you characterize a scenario where a committee of Canada's House of Commons ordered the production of papers and the entity of whom the production was requested did not comply? How is that characterized? Is that a breach of the privilege of the House of Commons? Is it, does it rise to being illegal? How is that characterized?
When there's a production order from a committee and there are concerns that are raised with respect to some of the information that is sought, the entity to which the information is requested may try to put in place or suggest some measures to protect the information for which they have concern, and the committee may decide to accept those measures, may accept to no longer insist on the production order, or may decide to insist on the production of all the information unredacted. If it is the case and the order of the committee is not complied with, the committee can report back to the House, and based on the committee's report, this could be raised as a question of privilege in the chamber.
That's the appropriate venue for it to be escalated to should the committee's request not be satisfied.
That's correct. The committee has the power to adopt order for the production of documents, but does not have the power to sanction. That power belongs to the House, and the proper process is for the committee to report to the House, and then a question of privilege can be raised, and the Speaker will rule on the matter.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Shea, did PCO direct departments or anyone within PCO to defy the will of this committee?
PCO did not direct any department nor its own employees to defy the will of the committee. However, PCO has used the same long-standing approach to the redaction of its own documents and would give the same advice to others. There are long-standing principles used by successive governments.
So the committee ordered the production
provided.
of documents, and PCO did not meet the request. And we heard testimony yesterday, or we heard read into the record, access to information results, an email from PCO that explained there was no attempt to satisfy the production order of the committee. Are you familiar with the email that I'm referring to?
I have not seen the email. I do not believe it has been provided to us. My understanding is there was an email that was referred to, if it is the one I'm thinking of, that was between Paul McKinnon and Maya Welburn. Is that the email that you're referring to?
Yep.
Maya Welburn left PCO in advance of when this particular parliamentary motion took place. And so while I have not seen the email, I can say with confidence it would not relate to this particular motion, as she was not a
Relates
PCO
to,
employee
sir,
at the time.
is the attitude of PCO to defy the obligation for your department to honor the responsibility that you have when a request, when an order of a committee of parliament is made for you to produce documents. It's not subject to any test that you choose to apply to it, or if you look to past practices of your predecessors or other individuals. That's not the test that needs to apply. The test that needs to apply is that we have the power as Parliament to request those documents, and your failure to produce them is a breach of the privileges of Canada's Parliament. And what happens when you do that as a department, when PCO does that, or agents acting on behalf of PCO do that, and they do it during successive governments, they say, well, look, we've been doing this for a long time. But I don't think that it's an encouraging sign to Canadians. I don't think that it's an honorable defense for someone to say, well, we've been breaking the law for 10 years, and so there were lots of different people who held elected office over the course of 10 years, and we got away with it. So we're going to continue to do it, and that's the precedent that has been established. There are hundreds of years of precedent that this law has existed under, and parliamentary privilege is not subjected to tests applied by PCO or by departments. It is a question that has been settled in law, and I have not heard an argument from you that excuses you from your responsibility to furnish this committee with those documents.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Kusmierczyk?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a couple questions that I have here regarding the costs. And this is a question to Ms. Bernier and the Public Sector Pension Investment Board. Can you just tell us a little bit, first of all, about the Public Sector Pension Investment Board and what it is that this organization does?
Yes, thank you for your question. So PSP is a Crown corporation that operates at arm's length from the government. Our mandate is part of our constituting act, and it is to invest the funds that are transferred to us from the government in the best interest of the beneficiaries and the contributors, and to maximize return without undue risk of loss. We invest globally around the world in different sectors and industries in order to achieve our mandate.
And so who are you managing these investments for, if you can just repeat that?
Yes, thank you. So we are managing the amounts that are transferred from the government for the funding of the post-April 1, 2000 liabilities, for the pension plans of the Federal Public Sector Service of Canada, the Canadian Forces, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and since March 1st, 2007, the reserve force as well.
We've heard translations, although they are necessary, are very costly. The PBO indicated that over $8.2 million have been spent on translations on this production of documents to this point. Can you tell us a little bit how much your organization has spent on translations to this point?
So we have encountered some challenges in the translation of these documents. We have communicated with the Translation Bureau, who were not able to support us in the translation for this request. We have also reached out to all of our network of translators who have also informed us that they didn't have the ability to deliver in the timing that we had available to us. So we had to find new translation resources that unfortunately did not end up being to the quality to meet our expectation or to meet the timing that we had, and so we ended up doing a portion of that translation internally with our own resources.
So is this money that's coming from federal public servants' retirement funds?
So these expenses on the translation are a part of our operating costs, and yes, they are paid from the money that goes to the pensions.
That is most unfortunate. That money should be staying to support our federal public servant, hardworking federal public servants who have retired. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Chair. I would yield my time to my colleague, Mr. Housefather.
Thanks. You have about 2.5 minutes, Mr. Housefather.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Shays, I want to come back to something you just said, which preoccupies me. Did you say that Ms. Welburn did not work at PCO this year at all?
I can confirm the exact date, but I believe she left at the end of last calendar year.
Because at the last meeting, if you look at the blues, Ms. Kusie stated that this email was from June the 6th, around the time we had the first group of departments appearing before the Committee on McKinsey Redactions on June the 5th, 2023. Mr. Shays, is it possible that Ms. Welburn could have sent this email from PCO on June the 6th, 2023?
It is not possible.
That's a very interesting question about how this committee may have been misled at the last meeting, given the fact that, this email was clearly indicated to the committee that it was related to this set of documents and came around the time of the first group of departments appearing before the committee. So, Mr. Chair, I would again make the request that Ms. Kusie now turns over that document that she's referenced to the committee. Can I ask for unanimous consent for her to do that, please?
Should ask for PCO to table it, see how long it takes them to get.
Yeah, I don't think
PCO
so.
wasn't
I
the
don't
one that
think
referred
so,
to
Mr.
it.
Housefather. Perhaps you return to your questioning.
Certainly, Mr. Shays, does it disturb you that a member of this committee would attempt to apply that PCO took this attitude toward documents when this email does not seem to have been related to these documents?
I have not seen the reference that you mentioned. I have heard that there was an email referred to. All I can say is that we have looked and we are confident that Ms. Welburn did not work at PCO at the time, and we would happily provide any email if we could find it that was related to that, but we have no such email that we can find.
Thank you very much. Perhaps the last point is, can you just confirm to the committee in writing then that Ms. Welburn did not work there in June of 2023?
I can confirm, and I have already confirmed that she left in December 2022.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. Ms. Sinclair Deguiné, it's a pleasure to have you at OGGO with us instead of our usual time together at Public Accounts. You have 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And hello to my colleagues. Thank you to our witnesses for being here. As the chair already stated, I am the Deputy Chair of Public Accounts. And if there's something that I could do in this committee, having not been to the other meeting, is to offer some perspective. I was the one who presented a unanimous consent motion at the Public Accounts Committee, a motion that requested that the government provide unredacted documents from pharmaceutical companies for the purchase of COVID-19 vaccines, and this was adopted with unanimous consent with an end date. And at this end date, we received from PSPC all contracts from 6 pharmaceutical companies, all unredacted. So how is it that at our Committee of Public Accounts, we were able to receive these documents, and PSPC complied even with such sensitive contracts, and yet in a similar situation in this committee, we have not received the same response, it appears. And when I look at the documents that were sent, when I look at all the redactions that are in these documents done by the government as well as McKinsey, McKinsey sent unredacted documents, well, it leads me to ask a lot of questions. It seems that this is not in good faith, or it's simply a question of not being competent. In any case, we need to resolve the issue so that the committee finally be able to access the documents that were requested, and the legal clerks have stated the committee has the right to do this investigation. And so, Mr. Shea, to begin, in the last meeting, I heard that you mentioned something. Just a second. You mentioned that the documents had been sent out redacted. And Mr. Harper, and this was according to what Mr. Harper had advised at the time. Is that correct, Mr. Shea?
At the last committee, I believe what you're referring to is I quoted from Open and Accountable Government, and I'm happy to read that passage again if you would like me to. But ultimately, what I indicated is that was from 2011 and was approved by the Prime Minister at the time, and it was to guide how public servants and ministers should interact with parliamentary committees. And what I indicated is in 2015, when the current Prime Minister approved Open and Accountable Government, that exact same passage was there. And so the message for me was this is successive governments who have given the exact same edict to members of the public service and to ministers about how to interact with committees, and is keeping keeping with what
Thank you.
governments have done as
D'accord.
well.
Okay, but now this is 2023, so whatever happened in 2011, 2015, this parliament has rights that supersede some of the advice that may have been given in the past. And so if this committee is requesting access to certain documents, it is reasonable that the public servants comply to this based on this committee's parliamentary privilege. And so, Mr. Shea, we'll begin with you. Am I pronouncing your name okay? How should I pronounce it? Shea. Okay, sorry. Perfect. So, Mr. Shea, if you would like to begin, could you confirm, or rather explain to me as simply as possible, because we don't have much time, how is it that you were not able to provide the unredacted documents that were requested in a timely manner?
We respectfully understand the position of the law clerk and what has been explained to this committee, and our approach to the production of documents is sensitive to the powers of the House of Commons and its committees in order to request production of documents and the role of members of the House of Commons in holding the government to account. However, the public services position is animated by other considerations, including respect for other laws enacted by Parliament. Successive governments have taken the view that laws enacted by Parliament itself prohibit the disclosure of certain types of documents. And so going back to my last appearance, we talked about some of the initial redactions from the Privy Council Office documents that were around commercial sensitivities and were around privacy.
Oui.
The Privacy Act explicitly prevents us from being able to share that information without the consent of the individual.
And yet,
What we did as PCO
Excusez-moi.
is
excuse me.
the
Oui,
individuals
excusez-moi,
to
Monsieur
seek
Shea.
that
Excuse me, Mr. Shea. I have very little time, and I wanted to comment on this. And yet, parliamentary privilege is above what you are mentioning currently. And that's why, in public accounts, we managed to have access to extremely confidential contracts between the government and pharmaceutical companies on the purchase of vaccines. And so we received this because at that time, Mr. Housefather knows this because he was there. We were able to do this. So is there something about this particular committee that you have a problem with, or certain members of this committee?
Monsieur Shea, j'attends une réponse.
Mr. Shea?
I apologize, I was listening to the end of the translation. I reflected on the last appearance, and when I read the Open and Accountable Government, the very end of it talks about the importance of members of Parliament in cooperation with ministers in their offices to find ways to respond to legitimate requests for information from members of Parliament within the limitations placed on them. And so a big part of, I think, with any of these requests is the importance of we as a government working with the committee to try to find solutions. And so I think there have been a number of examples in recent history where we have worked as a government with committees to try to find solutions to give access to national security information or other types of information using other methodologies and being creative where possible. I think that would be
Mr. Shea.
this committee would be that we remain open to finding solutions to make sure that you get the information that you need. I do want to reiterate in the case of PCO,
that is our time. I gave you a few extra moments,
Thank you.
Mr. Shea. We'll have another round, though. Mr. Johns, over to you, please, for 6 minutes.
Well, I appreciate that line of questioning. I'm going to stay on that, actually. In terms of ways to work with the committee, what efforts have you made to work with the committee in terms of the concerns that the committee's raised around the redactions that are there right now?
So I can't speak to the work with this committee as it's a different part of Privy Council office. I was called a couple weeks ago, and I've come today. I can speak to other examples where we have sought to provide information. And so as recently as February 13th, 2023, the Standing Committee on Veteran Affairs adopted a motion for the production of papers requesting that VAC provide and create, if necessary, a transcript of recorded telephone conversations from January 25th. What was key to that was that in negotiation with the department, it added to that order, furthermore, that VAC redact from the transcript any personal identifiable information. Our proposal would be, in any case where it's possible, we would like to work with the committee to suggest potential redactions that would ensure that you get all of the information that you need while respecting some of the other key limitations that we may have in trying to follow other laws that we are governed by as a government.
No, the Conservatives brought forward open and accountable government. They brought forward this document for the redactions under Stephen Harper and his government. Who was the minister that led that charge in the Conservative government?
I apologize, I do not know what minister led it, but it would have been the Prime Minister that approved it, and it would be normally the Privy Council office that worked with the Prime Minister's office to draft it.
Okay, what were the Conservatives doing? Why were they so afraid of, the committees getting access and parliamentarians getting access to, fully getting access to information? Why were they gatekeeping and road stopping?
I do not believe that to be the case. I believe that open and accountable government is about being open and accountable, but respecting the fact there are other laws, there are other policies and other considerations. And open and accountable government covers far more than just redaction of documents. It talks about the interaction between the public service and ministers, which we talked about at the last appearance when I was here. We were asked questions around, was there political interference with this? And the answer was, of course not. And that would also go back to open and accountable government and the principles.
I'm concerned because, obviously, today we're hearing from concerns from the Conservatives about policies that they brought in that are, that are now not working in their favor. But would this make sense for this committee to do a study on open and accountable government so that we can have a better depth and understanding of this policy that's been brought forward? Because clearly there needs to be another look at it because no one here is happy about it. Would you think that that would be a good idea for this committee to study it?
I would not have an opinion on the work that this committee should undertake.
Okay. So, there's 220,000 pages produced so far. Do you think that, have you ever seen anything like this in your time at the Privy Council office?
I cannot specifically recall one with this many pages, but it's worth noting this is 20 different departments. And so the Privy Council number of pages is 280. It's not that amount. So this has not been a huge burden for the Privy Council office, as I mentioned at the last
departments appearance. It has. And I think Ms. Bernier explained that this. Do you think it's been reasonable, the amount of time that we've asked, given to these departments to produce these documents? I mean, 220,000 documents. We did an analysis of that. It's about just scanning it at 30 seconds a page, because my team can't do it. It's 1,832 hours a year it would take full-time employee just to do a 30-second scan of these documents. So producing them, we're talking in the millions. Like, we know it's 8 million from PSPC just to translate. Ms. Bernier, can you give an idea of how much it cost for your team to translate these?
you. So on translation, as I mentioned earlier, obviously it's a lot of work that goes into this with the scope of this of these kinds of requests. And if you excuse me for 1 second, I can find the cost. I mean, obviously we're still working through a second submission, so these are not included. But as mentioned earlier, there's significant effort that's been put into this. And so on the translation, we are at $178,745.
That's going to come out of what would go to pensioners. So this is the problem I have. Like, we did this study to look at highly paid consultants. Now we're kind of way off track on where we're going. And I put forward a motion to expand it to include the other bigger, the other 5 highly paid consulting firms that are getting much more money than McKinsey. But I didn't ask for every single document because I was worried about the costs associated with that and the demands. Because we got a pretty good idea that they're skyrocketing. The government is basically privatizing work that should be in the public service. I got concerns around that. But I got real concerns about the cost of what this is happening to taxpayers. I'm deeply concerned about that. And I'm deeply concerned about redaction and how we walk through this. And I'm looking for some solutions, some sort of pathway to finding a bridge between this committee and government so we can get the answers we need. And certainly, I'm really concerned about the fact that we've spent 13 meetings now just on McKinsey. We haven't even gotten to Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, the rest of them, you know. This is 13 meetings. We're at 9 studies, this committee. We haven't produced a single report because we're going down rabbit holes. And I'd like to find a pathway here so we don't spend more time on this and get some answers. Do you have any ideas?
As I mentioned, I think working with departments to try to scope the request.
Mr. Shea, I'm afraid that is our time, but perhaps we can get back to it, Mr. Johns' next intervention. Ms. Kusie, for 6 minutes, please. Or, sorry, 5 minutes, please.
Sure. Thank you very much. First of all, Mr. Shea, who is Maya Welborn?
She was previously the Assistant Secretary to Cabinet for Legislative and House Planning, and she has since left PCO, as I mentioned.
Okay, and who took her place?
Julia Assetti.
Okay, and who does Julia Assetti report to?
Paul McKinnon.
Okay, and what is Paul McKinnon's role?
He's the Deputy Secretary to Cabinet for Governance, which includes machinery of government as well as the Legislative House Planning role.
Okay, so that would be out of the PCO.
That would be out of the PCO.
Okay, so I have a document here, which I read into the record last time, which is out of the PCO. Paul McKinnon is still at the PCO. I'm going to ask, Monsieur Bédard, are we entitled to these documents? And it was this opposition that passed the request to have the documents, that passed the motion to have the documents. Are we entitled to those documents since we passed a motion to that we should have those documents?
Provided the document you're referring to falls within an order that has been adopted by the committee.
Right. An order was adopted?
The committee is entitled to the document.
That's right. So an order was adopted that says that we are entitled to these documents, and yet I have here a note to Mr. McKinnon from Maya, who is informing Mr. McKinnon, who is still at the PCO, so under this branch that is here today, which says, and I'll read it again, the government considers it non-binding. Parliament does. If government doesn't produce documents as ordered by the House, then the matter can escalate in a number of different ways, including as far as finding that government is in contempt, minister or official being called to bar, not confidence vote, that this is the same kind of scenario as last June with Ian Stewart being called to the bar. So as my colleague, Mr. Barrett, pointed out, this was a conversation with someone who is still in the PCO. Is Paul McKinnon, are you on the same page as Paul McKinnon? Do you have meetings with Mr. McKinnon in terms of determining how you interpret what where your direction comes from? Because if you are on the same page as Mr. McKinnon, then the decisions of this committee are not binding. And it's very clear to me from this email where the PCO takes their direction. And it's not from this committee, it's not from parliamentarians, it's from the government. It's very clear by this document here. And I think anyone from any party, in particularly the government, is just obstructing democracy, in fact, by saying that we would not be entitled to these documents. But yet it seems that this is what is going on at PCO. So again, I remind all opposition members that we were the ones on this side of the House who made the decision to have these documents come from the government in a completely unredacted form in both official languages. And so, Mr. Chair, I'm going to take this time now to present another motion if I may.
Read the motion, please.
Okay, thank you very much. That further to the evidence received by the committee pursuant to the motion adopted on Monday, April 24th, 2023, and in relation to the redactions and improper translation of documents received by the committee pursuant to the order for production of documents adopted by the committee on Wednesday, January 18th, 2023, the committee is of the opinion that there is a potential breach of privilege which must be reported to the House, and therefore, A, that the draft report prepared by the analysts on this issue be amended to identify the following departments, agencies and Crown corporations that did not comply with the committee's order to produce unredacted documents or did not adequately translate documents prior to their submission. The Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, the Business Development Bank of Canada, Canada Border Services Agency, Canada Development Investment Corporation, Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, Canada Post, Destination Canada, Department of Finance Canada, Employment and Social Development Canada, the list goes on, Exportment Development Canada, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, National Defence, Natural Resources Canada, Office of the Veterans Ombud of Veterans Affairs Canada, the Privy Council Office, no surprise, Public Sector Pension Investment Board, Public Services and Procurement Canada, Trans Mountain Corporation. B, the draft report as amended be adopted. C, the report be entitled, Question of Privilege on Providing Documents to the Committee. D, the chair, clerk, and analyst be authorized to make such grammatical and editorial changes as may be necessary without changing the substance of the report. E, pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests that the government table a comprehensive response to this report. F, the dissenting or supplementary opinions be in Calibri 12-point font, left aligned, single-spaced, and be submitted electronically in both official languages to the clerk of the committee, not later than 4 p.m. on Friday, June 23rd, 2023, and that the chair present this report to the House at the earliest opportunity. And, Mr. Chair, I would just like to say that, again, we have requested these documents 3 times. I remind my opposition colleagues, we would not have had to spend so much time on this matter had we just received the documents properly translated in an unredacted form. But alas, we did not. We did not for reasons of the government as well as opposition members. And this is why we continue on this. The first time was on January 18th. The second time was a March 5th request by the chair. The third time was on March 8th. You know, I will also say we had such a delay, our poor analysts had to redraft the report a second time, wasting their time as well. Whereas if we would have just dealt with this matter at hand, which was getting the documents that we were entitled to as parliamentarians and having passed a motion, all opposition parties at that time in agreement, I'm not sure why things change, but I guess it's like a relationship, things change sometimes. And we don't have those documents. And as such, we unfortunately find ourselves in this position today. Oui, aussi, je sais que...
Also, I know that Julie said several times that unfortunately we did not receive the documents in both official languages. And the quality of the translation was not adequate. It was not the same quality that we received in English.
As well. So, you know, Mr. Chair, I'm putting this forward today. Despite the government not wanting us to see these documents, because it is evident that this is happening, and this is evident that it is happening at the highest level of government with the PCO here today. Despite that, despite opposition members who were once on board with transparency in the fight against a company that is corrupt, in the fight against a company that has fueled the opioid crisis, something I thought that this member on this side of this table was committed to getting to the bottom of and solving. Despite all of that, here we are here we are. Yeah, that's all there is to do is laugh at this point because of the place that we are at now. That's all we can do is laugh. But I'm not going to sit here and laugh, Mr. Chair. I'm going to once again, through this motion, ask the committee to pass this motion to get the documents, Mr. Chair, and I'm just going to leave it now. I have some clues as to what will go on, but I think Canadians will see, again, the obstruction of information that is occurring at the highest levels in coordination with the coalition, and I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I've started a speaking list. The motion is in order. We have Mr. Barrett, then Mr. Johns, and then you, Mr. Housefather, and then Ms. Sinclair de Gagné.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks to my colleague, Ms. Kusie, for this motion. So we've been on dealing with this for some time, and lots of discussion about the volume of documents that have been requested and the amount of time that it's taken. But it was an order of the committee that the documents be produced. And there are lots of great things that parliamentary committees can do, and matters that are still under review by the Standing Committee on Government Operations that can be completed over this term of Parliament. But the situation that we're faced with, though, is that if we undertake a study about diversity in procurement, if we undertake a study on shipbuilding, if we have a study that expands to Deloitte and KPMG and PricewaterhouseCoopers, if we want to review the criteria that are used by government to award contracts and whether they should be awarded to people or to companies that have been involved in supercharging opioid sales or attempting to, in other countries, attempting to do that in this country, awarding contracts to companies that have engaged in fraudulent practices in other countries, that have been involved in election interference, that are so morally bankrupt that they would hold corporate retreat adjacent to concentration camps, and specifically an area that Canada's Parliament has said to have been where a genocide is occurring. If we want to look at any of those things, and the committee wants to ask for any documents, if we're content to just say that the entities that we ask for the documents from can just say, well, it's private information, we don't want to share it with you. Oh, well, case closed. Parliament doesn't need to look at it then. If that's what we're content with, then yeah, we can dispose of this motion and move on to those other things and not be able to see anything that the people that we are studying or investigating don't want us to see. We're going to be pretty ineffective. And that will survive not just this Parliament and not just this government, but governments into the future. And witnesses today have talked about departmental plans and government position papers from more than a decade ago. If we want to use those as what we're relying on, and the current government had claimed that better was what they would do, that they were going to do better than that. They didn't like the conditions as they existed, and then do the exact same thing. We're going to keep getting the same results. And it would be astonishing to find ourselves, and frightening at the thought, to find ourselves with a single party in government forever in this country. And so if we don't want to improve on what happened a decade ago under a previous government, or improve on what's happening with this government, why would anyone expect, well, how could Canadians possibly expect that there would be an improvement on that with future governments, particularly if the opposition sees that their document production request was not met, and they say, well, we want to continue to look into things, and the government is obviously obstructing information from Parliament. That's what's going to happen with a future government if we don't have the opportunity to fix it and to demonstrate to departments that they're not allowed to continue to do what they claim they've always done. Oh, that person doesn't work here anymore, so we're not responsible for them saying that our department doesn't believe that committee actually has the juice to get these documents from us. What are they going to do? Was kind of the gist of the email that Ms. Kusie read. I guess they're about to find out what we're going to do. And the dollars spent on the document production or the time spent on the document production is not the issue that has been raised in the failure to produce the information in the form that it was ordered by this committee. It's their refusal to give us the information. Please, I stand to be corrected from you, Chair, from the analysts, from the witnesses, anyone who is listed here, that the only impediment to them meeting the request of this committee is time and money. That's not what we're hearing. If they're saying, well, we just need a little more time, and we're prepared to give you the documents as they become available, well, then we should remove that individual entity from, or those entities one by one from the list. But that's not what we're hearing. They have a different set of rules that they are looking to operate by than Canada's Parliament operates by. Well, I don't work at PCO. I work for Canadians, and we have laws that allow us to order these documents. And what we're seeing is that the servants are becoming the masters of Parliament. And that's not the position that we want to find ourselves in. I don't like to be there as an opposition member. I wouldn't want to be there on the government side either. That's not how this place is supposed to work. So we had this discussion at committee. We had this discussion amongst this group several months ago. More time. One, write them a letter, tell them we're about to take the next step. That was the request from Mr. Kusmierczyk. That was his request. I protested. I said they'd had enough time. But just because you get your say doesn't mean you get your way, and we gave them more time. Mr. Johns said that he wanted to see them here, and he wanted to ask them the questions. And I think I protested. I thought that it was sufficient that the powers that are established, that we're able to order these documents, was sufficient. But here we are, and we have asked for them all to come. And I haven't heard anything different than what they've said to this point. So those were the concerns raised by the fourth party and by the government. And that was that they wanted to give them more time, give them a chance, and they wanted to hear from them. And perhaps there would be something compelling that they'd say. I find myself not compelled by what they've said, and in fact, distressed, because this is going to be the state of play going forward, and not just for the committee, Standing Committee on Government Operations, for all parliamentary committees. If they don't feel like giving us the information, they won't. And that's what we're choosing to accept or not. Mr. Housefather and Mr. Kusmierczyk at our previous meeting this week had said there was concern that referring this to the House was an attempt to delay the business of the House. The relevance of Parliament, the importance of Parliament, only exists if we actually protect the powers that we have as legislators. Mm-hmm. I undertook on Monday, having spoken to the the House Leader for His Majesty's loyal opposition that this would not be raised before adjournment at the end of this week for the planned recess if it was referred to the House. But that wasn't to the satisfaction of government members, so I question their sincerity in raising that as their objection. But we have, Chair, checked all of the boxes. Mm-hmm. We checked the box of giving the departments more time, a lot of time. We checked the box of giving them the opportunity to come here, and the departments individually, Chair, to offer statements or remarks expanding on their opportunity to correspond in writing with this committee. The majority of the representatives from these organizations declined to even speak to the issue. But they were given the opportunity to come, and they were given the time to produce the documents. And we've had the legal opinion from the House that is crystal clear that we, as a committee, are without restriction entitled to these documents. Mm-hmm. Cost, time, care, and control of the documents are not the issue. The issue is that these entities do not recognize the right of Parliament to require the production of these documents. That's what it comes down to. So either we're effective and we have the powers that have been given to us as a parliamentary committee, as a standing committee, or we give them away. And so we hear in the House often when the opposition asks the government about what's going on at committee. And the response is always, committees are independent and they're the masters of their own domain. So there's no party line, there's no supply and confidence agreement that would weigh into this. It's strictly the opinion of the regular members of this committee, or those who the associate members who are appropriately substituted onto the committee, who are of the opinion that this does rise does rise to affect our privileges as a committee. So that this is the foundation on which all of the work that we do is built, our ability to actually get people to come and talk to us and to give us the papers to read so that we can understand the issues. I'm not a lawyer. We brought one today. Doesn't work for the opposition. He works for Canada's Parliament. And we heard in response to my questions of some of these same witnesses last week that they're not lawyers, but they disagree with the one of Canada's Parliament. I'm gonna err on the side of Canada's Parliament in this case, and my understanding is supported by what we've heard from his testimony, and that's that the privileges of this committee have been violated, and the only way for us to redress this is for the matter to be referred to the House. And that's why I support this motion, and I'm very concerned about our ability to meaningfully really do any work for the remainder of this Parliament if we don't refer this matter to the House, but also in future Parliaments. And I think that's the question that we should be concerned with. That's what the question, certainly, that I'm concerned with.
Thanks, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Johns.
So the idea was to get witnesses to come here so we could ask them questions and get answers and try to find a pathway to a solution. But instead of doing that, we're debating this motion. Now, so the Conservatives bring in the rules, right? They bring in the rules in 2010, and today they're kicking and screaming because the rules that they brought in don't work for them today. Like, you can't make this stuff up, that they're yelling and screaming at public servants because of the rules they brought in. I don't like the rules, actually. And it's interesting because Mr. Barrett talked about the history of government after government with these bad policies, and I agree. You know, that's why the NDP wants their turn in government. We're working on that. And as I'm getting heckled by the Conservatives, I will say this, you know, there is some difference, but there's not a big difference between Conservatives and Liberals. We just saw them work together on whistleblowing to defeat a bunch of motions by the Bloc and the NDP to make sure that whistleblowers had a better structure in terms of support in protecting them. So we saw them gang up on that. But, and I will say this, yes, I supported this motion, but I am embarrassed about the cost of what this has taken on the public servants, the delays in other work that you could be doing. $8 million just for translation from PSPC. The $172,000 taken from pensioners. When 2 paragraphs were missing out of 800 plus pages, this is not okay. We're doing 9 studies. We haven't completed 1. Not 1. I'm embarrassed. I had a part in this. We had a part in this, but I would never, ever go down this rabbit hole again. I'll tell you that right now. And we should be studying accountable government. If the Conservatives are so upset about the rules that they brought in, then let's look at it. But let's do it right. We can't do anything right here. We can't even do McKinsey and say, hey, here's dissenting report, or here's a report that we can include this concern as part of our main report. Even the Governor General, motions start dropping in here ahead of the report. McKinsey, more motions start, like let's ban McKinsey. Let's include it in the report. Let's actually do a report. Something we can bring to the House. Recommendations we can actually make to the government and then hold them to account. We can't do that because no one wants to do it. Like, why even do studies if we're just going to play games here? Like, this is out of control. And, you know, this idea around the McKinsey and the toxic drug crisis and even an attempt to shame me. You should be ashamed. No, I am not ashamed, actually. I'm not ashamed by listening to experts.
Just 1 second, colleagues.
No,
let me just say, colleagues, Mr. Johns has the floor. I would ask everyone just allow him the
Thank
floor.
Thank you. And you know, Mr. Chair, if we're going to ban McKinsey for their role in the toxic drug crisis, which might be a good recommendation for the report at this committee, we should also, when we're doing the bigger report, look at some of those other highly paid consulting firms and their role in some of the scandals that have happened in this country. We got to make sure that we've got some standards that are legitimate and that they're across the whole spectrum, and that we've got credibility. And I'm not afraid of that. But to try to insinuate, first, that McKinsey is responsible for all of the toxic drug crisis is completely ludicrous. Bad drug policy is responsible for the toxic drug crisis that's killing people. Fentanyl entering the drugs that are on the street is a result of the toxic drug crisis, and I mean that's killing people, and clearly failed drug policy. What we've tried to do is bring forward policies that are recommended by experts, including the Police Chiefs Association, including chief medical health officers across the country, including the expert task force on substance use, including experts across the country. But the Conservatives don't want to listen to them. They just want to go on, let's just put it all on McKinsey. They don't want to come back with a robust, comprehensive response to a complex issue. It's not so simplistic. These issues are not simplistic, and I'm sorry as I'm getting heckled again by the Conservatives on this issue that we're talking about today. This is policy and rules that the Conservatives brought in. And they're yelling at public servants, which is completely unacceptable, to yell at people. This is a committee. We're parliamentarians. Leadership means we have to work together through difficult times. And I think that we should be getting back to the witnesses so we can ask them questions and include the concerns and what we hear in the report. And if most of this needs to go in the report, I'm fine with that. But to have this in this motion designed to not, to have dissenting opinions report to the House in 48 hours from now, like this is like completely unreasonable. Like we have to get to reasonable. But I want to work actually with my colleagues here that think that I don't. I actually do want to work with them. But my municipal government, my little town of Tofino, we didn't even act like this. We asked staff to come back with a report. We looked at the report. We made decisions. I sat in local government. That's how it was. We're Parliament. We're running a country. This is not okay. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Mr. Johns. Mr. Housefather.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will try to be succinct. I have a few things that I wanted to say, but I do want to get back to the witnesses also who were called here today, and we have many of them. I think we should have been using our time with the witnesses. Mr. Chair, coming back to the question of something that was really important that was raised by my colleague, Madame Sinclair de Gagné before. Why at public accounts was it okay to obtain the unredacted copies of the vaccine contracts, and why did I work with her and with you, sir, to get those? Because it was something that was reasonable. It was something that was tailored, targeted, and there was a mechanism put in place that everybody agreed with that ensured that everything was kept confidential. And it wasn't a fishing expedition of thousands and thousands and thousands of documents at huge cost and huge effort that kept the bureaucracy tied up for months and cost millions of dollars for translation. There were very specific contracts, and I agree with the principle that committees should be able to get documents that they ask for, and that they should be able to work out a way to get them in an unredacted way. I believe that very strongly. I think we should be looking into the current procedures being used by the Privy Council office and by the departments and rethink them and make suggestions. But I don't think that what we did here was well thought through at all. I think it was not well thought through, and if I could go back, I wouldn't have voted for the way the motion was, because it was clearly much more wide-ranging than I think any of us really understood at the time, or certainly me. The second thing, Mr. Chair, we've had a lot of outrage about documents being shared with certain redactions. This motion was raised by once again referring back to an email that now I've asked for copies of twice, and both times been refused. An email that at the previous meeting was used to clearly suggest that this was written in June of this year and tied to the McKinsey documents, was again raised as in the questioning to the Privy Council office as a precursor for this motion. And as opposed to receiving it redacted or unredacted, this committee has not received it at all. It hasn't been shared, even though it's being relied upon as the reason why the motion was brought forward. So I find it outrageous that in the last meeting, I was clearly misled to believe that this document was written as an email about McKinsey, when the person who allegedly wrote it has not been with the Privy Council office this year. And that email that we keep talking about has not been shared with the rest of us. So, Mr. Chairman, given that, I move that this debate be adjourned so that we can return to the witnesses. Thank you. Or that the debate on the motion be adjourned.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Housefather. It is a dilatory motion, so we will go to an immediate vote. Madam Chair.
Mr. Housefather?
In favor.
That the debate be adjourned. Mr. Bains?
In favor.
Mr. Jowhari?
In favor.
Mr. Kusmierczyk?
Support.
Ms. Thompson?
In favor.
Mr. Barrett?
Gross, no.
Ms. Bloc?
Nay.
Ms. Kusie?
Opposed.
Madame Vignola? I'm so sorry. Madame Sinclair Dagenet?
Madame Sinclair de Gagné dit non.
Gagné. Sorry, je m'excuse. Mr. Johns?
Yes.
Je m'excuse. Madame Desgagnés, vous avez dit non? Non, merci. Parfait. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Hey,
4 nays.
Okay. Colleagues, we will get back to the debate. If we wish to have time with our nominee, we're finishing at 6:55 today, so we will end this at this round with the witnesses at about 6:20. Mr. Bains, you're up for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be sharing some of my time with my colleague, Mr. Kusmierczyk. So at issue here, and thank you, witnesses, for waiting and patiently for us to get back to our questions here. At issue is a significant portion of the documents are being provided with redactions. So can you explain what the redactions are for? Maybe Mr. Shea. If these redactions impact the documents in such a way as to interfere with this committee study on McKinsey and Company.
So I have not seen all the documents. I can speak for the Privy Council office. We have 2 paragraphs that are redacted for cabinet confidence that relate to a meeting where there was a reference to a cabinet confidence. They do not materially impact the documents in any way. We have fully provided, translated, and unredacted documents as it relates to all the McKinsey contracts.
Okay, and McKinsey provided all of their documentation unredacted. Have any attempts been made to reconcile this with your own production of papers?
I believe what you're saying is why did we redact it and they did not? So we are bound by privacy policies and other policies. And as I mentioned earlier, we cannot release commercially sensitive information without the permission of the company. We cannot release private information without the consent of the individual. We as a government rely on the trust of companies, of citizens, of individuals to provide us their private information, and we safeguard that and we follow the laws. So in the case of the Privy Council office, once we learned that McKinsey was willing to unredact theirs, we of course unredacted their information with their consent. And for the other 2 pieces of personal information that we had redacted 2 signatures related to the contract by public servants, not the names. It was very transparent who signed the contract, but the actual signature. And you can appreciate identity theft, reasons someone would want to protect their signature. Nevertheless, we asked those public servants, would they be willing to allow us to unredact that to be fully transparent to the committee? They, of course, would have had the ability to say no. Both absolutely said yes right away, and we have unredacted those as well. So we are left with just those 2 paragraphs, which we do not believe in any way changes the interpretation of the documents or the clarity of the documents.
Okay, and I'll go to Mr. Dermarkar for the same questions, and then I'll go to my colleague here.
My apologies for turning on my mic just before you finished. So I'd like to say that our AECL's original submission contained very few redactions to begin with. After the committee's request, we submitted an updated package that removed virtually all the remaining redactions. Only a very small percentage of the documentation is redacted, approximately 1 page out of more than 150 pages of documents. The small number of remaining redactions protect third-party information, not originating from McKinsey, that's both commercially sensitive and relates to federal-provincial relations. And the other previously redacted information that is now that was subsequently provided includes personal information and banking information. And what we did was we highlighted this information in yellow so you could see it. And we identified that we would want the committee to redact this information should they choose to share it more broadly outside of the committee's membership.
One final one, but actually back to Mr. Shea here. Can we please ask PCO officials to undertake find the email mentioned by our colleague Ms. Kusie and then submit it to the committee?
It is difficult for me to commit to doing that without knowledge of the information. I don't know the date of the email. I don't have any information that would allow us to find it. We have attempted to find it based on what we heard at a previous meeting. We have no such email that we found, certainly not in the June timeframe. As I mentioned, Ms. Welburn did not work at PCO at the time. We would happily work with the committee to try to provide the email if we had more information from the member who has apparently this email through an ATIP.
You have about a minute, 45 seconds.
No, I was just going to say, again, we've had 13 meetings now on McKinsey, 45 witnesses. This is, the Conservative colleagues have now led us on what is an expensive fishing expedition. And it's netted not a single minnow of evidence at all that there's anything untoward that was
Let us see the documents.
here. And we've heard, obviously, the tremendous cost to organizations like the Public Sector Pension Investment Board in terms of actual money. But can you speak as well to the cost in terms of opportunity cost, in terms of resources that have been directed away from the day-to-day work that you conduct on behalf of your members? If you can maybe speak to that. Ms. Bernier.
You've got about 15, 20 seconds, Ms. Bernier. Please be brief.
Well, I don't have the number of employees specifically that have been on this, but there's significant resources that have been dedicated to complying with the requests of the committee to make sure that we also proceed diligently. So, of course, this is time and attention that is taken away from our normal investment activities that are dedicated to achieving our mandate.
Same question to
sorry,
Mr.
thank you very
Ledwell
much.
from,
That is our
Veterans
time.
Affairs. Thank you.
You're welcome to respond in writing to the committee if you wish. Ms. Sinclair-Deguenet for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci.
Thank you. First thing, I'm hearing arguments that are so absurd that they're shocking to me. And I say this coming from public accounts, which often is difficult as well. Now, in terms of the amount of time that this took, now I see someone across the way who was asking questions is now on his phone. I'm wondering if he could just reflect for 2 minutes on the necessary resources to redact documents instead of giving them to us right away. Now, someone has to go through the documents and think about what needs to be redacted. Is he taking into account all this time? It's completely absurd. It's the first time I'm here in this committee, but I'm shocked. I'm blown away. And then to respond to Mr. Housefather's comments, I agree with you, Mr. Housefather. Our request was more detailed. And I think that may be the root of the problem, in fact, the fact that there are so many McKinsey contracts. But maybe if we're trying to be constructive, this committee could start somewhere. For example, we could say we are requesting different departments to send us the McKinsey documents for a certain year in a certain amount of time. For example, in the next 2 months, 1 year, 2 months later, another year, and maybe that would give the committee a bit of a break. And I think that everyone was acting in good faith. It's likely that what we would do right now, but it's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is people who have absurd arguments on the amount of time that this takes, except that you've taken so much time to debate these documents instead of looking at the or debate a motion instead of looking at the documents and doing your job. And you're not answering the fundamental question. How is it that since 2016, we have seen costs going to these companies like McKinsey just skyrocket? So spending on consulting companies has skyrocketed since 2016. And so the question that this committee needs to simply ask is, why? And you've never answered the question. Why is it that you have not received the unredacted documents? Let's start somewhere in good faith. I know that you are competent individuals, so act, please, in good faith. Thank you.
Voilà.
Thank you, Madame. Mr. Johns for 2.5, please.
Okay, so let me get this straight here. Conservatives create this policy through open and accountable government. Now there's obviously documents are coming back. You've got a couple of paragraphs that are redacted just here today that we're talking about. Do you believe that they would have known that this would have happened, that there would be redactions coming back, given they designed the policy that is creating the redactions in the first place?
I think it would be well understood in the advice from Privy Council office that the reason to have this is to be clear what can be redacted and what cannot be redacted or must be redacted. And the goal, of course, is to minimize redactions to what is absolutely necessary, and that is the advice that PCO provides the department.
So the designers of this policy that have created the redactions, you think that they would have a full understanding that there would be redactions because they designed the policy that would make sure that there's redactions on things that, you know, you've highlighted here around national security or privacy?
Yes, I believe those who drafted it and approved it would have not only anticipated it, but expected that those key things like cabinet confidence and national security would be protected.
So that we would be right here today, ending up in this very conversation, potentially, that this could be a strategy.
I won't speak to strategy and how this would play out at a parliamentary committee.
How do we move forward? I'm going to go back to that, Mr. Shea. How do we get a pathway to get through this? Obviously, I think we need to study this terrible policy that protects Liberals and Conservatives when they're in government from getting information to the committee, to MPs, and to the public that was created by the Conservatives. How do we move forward in terms of the stalemate that we're at right now with this committee and trying to get access to the information without tearing down government by, you know, requesting 220,000 pages to get to the bottom of what's going on here?
I would not seek to give advice to the committee on how to move forward, but I would reiterate what I've said before. We are happy to work with parliamentary committees, and in fact, open and accountable government encourages departments, encourages ministers to work with parliamentary committees to find consensus, to find compromise. As I reflected from my last appearance, I did look at previous rulings from the Speaker of the House. I know that was something that was raised the last time, and I would note that in 2010, Speaker Milliken did give a ruling that talked about safeguarding this, and he referred to a House of Commons Procedure and Practice, second edition, and quoted pages 1068 and 1069 that talked about particular attention is paid to questioning public service.
That is our time, Mr. Shea. Thanks very much.
Please read that into the record later.
Put it in writing and send it to us, please. Ms. Bloc, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And perhaps this is a good segue just to the request that I have through you to Mr. Shea. I would ask that Mr. Shea please provide us with the policy document that he's referencing and attributing to the Conservative Party. If you wouldn't mind sending that to this committee so we can take a look at it, the historical document that you've attributed to the Conservative Party of Canada.
Just if I could add clarity, it is not related to a party. It is related to the Government of Canada, so it would have been the Conservative government approved by the Prime Minister. It is not about the Conservative Party nor the Liberal Party.
Fine. If you could send that document that you've referenced that was created by the Government of Canada when the Conservatives were in government, I would appreciate that.
I would be pleased to do so.
Thanks, Ms. Bloc. Ms. Bloc yields her time. Mr. Jowhari, you're up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A quick question from Ms. Wademan and then a request from Mr. Shea. Ms. Wademan, I understand that you are the CEO of the Canada Development Investment Corporation. And can you briefly tell us what's your mandate and why you felt that those redactions are needed because it may be impacting your mandate?
I thank the honourable member for his question, Mr. Chair. CDEV is a federal crown corporation that provides specialized financial advisory to the Department of Finance, and we're also responsible for a number of large subsidiaries, including their oversight and standing up and incubating new entities. In regards to the redactions for the McKinsey document, CDEV went out of its way to redact as little as possible. We did undertake certain redactions, and they pertained to information in the report that identifies confidential business information of third parties. We also redacted information that could harm the economic interests of Canada.
Thank you. My request to Mr. Shea is that can you, sir, kindly go undertake a search through completed ATIPs to find the emails that Ms. Kusie read into the records between Paul McKinnon and Maya Wellborn on June 6th. We requested that I believe, last time as well. But if you could undertake that, that would be really appreciated and submit it to the committee in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jowhari. Just before we dismiss our witnesses, Ms. Bernier, if you don't mind clarifying something for the committee, please. Your remarks, it sounded as if you were intimating that the costs of operations or the costs of the translation would result or possibly result in reduced pension payouts. I'm wondering if you'd like to clarify that response, because I think it's very clear what your response was, but I'd like to give you an opportunity to clarify that response, please, especially in light of 5.6 of the funding policy for public sector pension plans that clearly shows the costs are borne by the government.
So what I mean is that the costs, our operating costs, are taken out of the net, or netted against our returns, and what is then
guaranteed. It's a defined plan that are guaranteed.
Yes.
So these costs, these operating costs, would not result in reduced pensions in any way. And I wanted to give you a chance to clarify that, because your comments, I'll be blunt, were extremely misleading. And I'm surprised that a person in your position would make such blatantly misleading comments. So I'm glad you had an opportunity to clarify that public service pensions would not be reduced. PSPIB has many hundreds of millions in operating expenses, and many millions spent in bonuses. So I find it shocking that 100,000 in translation costs would possibly affect pensions. So I'm glad we had an opportunity to clear that up. Witnesses, you are dismissed. We will suspend for a very brief moment to welcome our nominee for next round. We're suspended for a few moments. We are back, and we welcome Ms. Solloway to our committee for a short period. We'll have a 5-minute opening statement, and then we'll have a round of 1 6-minute intervention from each party. Ms. Solloway, welcome to Operations and Estimates, what I call the mighty OGGO. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you so much for providing me the opportunity to be here today for your consideration of my nomination. I'm very grateful. As a long-serving international public servant, I've consistently demonstrated my commitment to the rule of law, including due process and access to justice. In a public service context, that requires a safe space in which personnel can come forward and be heard when there are concerns that, if left unaddressed, could shake public confidence and cause serious threat to the integrity of the public service, casting a pall over the work environment for dedicated personnel and impeding the ability to deliver quality service that is owed to the public. The Public Sector Integrity Commissioner is the guardian of procedural fairness in the investigation of wrongdoing, including due process for whistleblowers, for the subjects of allegations of wrongdoings, and for other participants in the process, with overarching objectives of promoting an ethical public service culture and also ethical public service culture in the federal government. This is a critical juncture for the Office of the PSIC, with active consideration of Bill C-290, as well as the work of the external task force appointed to explore revisions to the Act. I look forward to cooperating with the task force and to the faithful implementation of the Public Servants Disclosure Protection Act, including any amendments that may emerge. Ma carrière comprend de l'expérience.
My career includes experience in labor relations, law, and management, both domestically and internationally, including more than 22 years at the senior executive level in the international public sector, such as at the International Criminal Court, the United Nations, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. As a pioneer of programs to rebuild and transform justice systems in challenging circumstances, I have successfully led multiple strategic and change management efforts. In several positions, most notably as the legal advisor in conflict zones, such as Kosovo and Central African Republic, as well as Director of Rule of Law in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I oversaw human rights reports, ensuring the accuracy of evidence-based allegations, whilst considering other factors such as witness and informant protection. I have extensive global experience in the development and implementation of investigation and policy strategies to address serious crimes and human rights abuses. As the legal advisor for sex crimes at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, I guided the investigation that led to the first conviction for sex crimes in an international tribunal in Akayesu.
I've investigated crimes, defended accused, and built cases for the prosecution in criminal proceedings. I have worked for the protection of witnesses and engaged in capacity building for judges and investigators, all of which provides me with the perspective to be truly neutral, unbiased, and fair to all. This, along with my laser focus on due process protections for all parties, will provide the foundation for the approach I will take as Commissioner. Lastly, our dedicated civil servants deserve a workplace where they feel safe and proud of the work that they do. I commit to the unwavering objective of exposing wrongdoing and fostering trust in an ethical public sector for our personnel in the 134 government institutions subject to the Act and for the Canadian people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll start with Ms. Kusie for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Madame Solloway, welcome to Government Operations Committee, or the mighty OGGO as our chair refers to it. Can you just tell us, please, when were you informed that you had the nomination?
When I had the nomination, I'm guessing, I'm not sure, but I'm guessing shortly before it was announced. There were discussions leading up to it, but in my mind anyway, it was never assured until very shortly, like a day or two before the formal announcement was made. I can't tell you the exact date.
I'm sorry, and remind me when the announcement was made.
I would have to verify that. I'm going to say approximately a month ago, or maybe
okay.
I'm not sure.
All right, and can you tell me about the final interview that you had with the final conversation you had with the president of the Treasury Board prior to receiving the nomination, please?
So that followed a process that was very similar to the process in other organizations like the UN. So I had already taken a test. I assume I was shortlisted for a panel interview. I went through the panel interview, and then a period of time after that, and I could not be exact as to the period, I was contacted and told that the minister would like a few words with me. We had a few words. And even at that time, she did not at all commit to the nomination. It was just, okay, thank you very much. And it was probably about 10 minutes in length.
You mentioned you wanted to foster trust amongst public servants. What are some ideas you have to do that, please?
Well, until I get into the job, I don't really know the mechanics of how I will do it. And I also, of course, await the outcomes of Bill C-290 as well as the review. But I do have some notions of how it's been done elsewhere. I think first and foremost, people have to have trust in the office. They have to know about the office and then have trust in it. So one of the things that I would do is to reach out to other parts of the system that may have positive contact with staff members who may find themselves in difficult situations, such as ombudspersons that may exist in different organizations, human resource persons who may have knowledge of trends, and I would receive information from them or consult with them as to how they think we should approach raising the profile of the office and making it most effective. So it's hard for me to be more specific at this stage other than to say that I would faithfully implement the mandate. And in terms of the details beyond that, I'm really unable to give you many more specifics as I really haven't been in the system.
Sure. Thank you. You mentioned the cases where you feel you were able to listen to two sides and pardon me if I'm poorly paraphrasing, determine, sort of a fair outcome or what you believe was the right outcome. Can you give us an example of a case that stands out in your mind, perhaps a difficult one or one that you were particularly proud with the outcome in terms of having navigated a complicated situation, or just something from your background or an experience where you can draw to a specific time where you feel it's particularly pertinent to the work you'll be doing here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm struggling to find a case. I didn't have an adjudicative role in any of my functions, so that's a little bit tricky. I have been the chair of several boards of inquiry, and during the boards of inquiry, I sought information as the chair. The whole board of inquiry sought information from relevant parties, from witnesses to various incidents. There was one case, which was actually the first case of sexual exploitation and abuse that was in the in the DRC when I was there. There was a colonel of a particular contingent, which I prefer not to name, against whom certain allegations were made. Some of the witnesses were obviously, well, because it turned out to be true, so some of the witnesses were traumatized. So one has to know how to approach that. I had been the legal advisor for sex crimes at the Rwanda tribunals, so I was already, I think, quite experienced in being able to interact with people who had been traumatized and to elicit from them the information needed to get a better picture of the circumstances. Notwithstanding that, although you get this information or these testimonies, having been a defense lawyer, I never take for granted that everything is complete or that one perspective is the only perspective. So, of course, I listened as part of the panel to the person who was accused of these wrongdoings. And together with the panel, we came to a recommendation for our hierarchy. I'm not sure if that answers the question, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Ms. Thompson, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, and welcome to the committee. I just want to circle back to the previous question on the nomination panel. Could you provide more detail on how you were tested and interviewed in that the nomination process, and what skills specifically were evaluated?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I don't remember, but it was a competency-based interview. Very much like other interviews that I had been a part of in the UN, both as an applicant and also as panel member. And they went along the lines of, can you give us an example when you would have demonstrated this competency or that competency? I must say I don't specifically recall what the competencies were. And so having been familiar with that type of interview, I was able to draw on examples from my past to illustrate my capability for the different competencies. And that, of course, came after the test. I do not remember the questions on the test. I'm very sorry. So that is what I recall.
Thank you. And based on your international experience, what types of measures work, in your opinion, to address retaliatory responses in the workplace?
Mr. Chairman, I think there are certain measures that I'm speaking generically here because every organization is different, it's structured differently, and so I can't speak to the Government of Canada. In an ideal situation, one tries to avoid a situation where there might be retaliation. But I don't know what measures are permitted under the human resource rules of the Canadian Civil Service, so I'm unable to provide specifics as to what the options would be. In other organizations, for example, it could mean either changing reporting lines pending the outcome of a complaint or of an issue, or permanently. It could be asking whether the individual who's made the complaint wishes to move to another area temporarily or otherwise or not, but not to be forced. The same option might be given in some circumstances to the person who's accused of wrongdoing. The person accused of wrongdoing, depending on the strength of the prima facie evidence, might be put on leave, administrative leave, with or without pay, usually with pay, but not necessarily. So there are a number of measures that one can take to keep the staff member in a protected environment so that they don't feel threatened for having blown the whistle.
Thank you. We've heard certainly in this committee the number of public servants who expressed their skepticism, the long day, with whistleblowing protection. How could you help improve that trust in your role as commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How could I improve that? I think that it is vitally important for the word to get around that if one engages with the office, they will be protected. And for word to get around, the office has to perform as it should perform. And I must say that it can't be one office alone. It's the safety that a person might feel has to also emanate from other parts of the organization. There is often stigma attached to being the person who raises an issue even when everybody else knows the issue is there. And human nature is human nature. And so I think it's a whole of organization responsibility. And I think that is something that together with relevant stakeholders and counterparts we could discuss to see how people can be made to feel safe anywhere in the system. It cannot emanate from the office alone.
Thank you. I'm going to see if I can get one more question in. Are you comfortable to work in both official languages?
Oui, j'ai l'habitude de travailler en français.
Yes, I'm used to working in French, especially in the Congo, the RDC, amongst other countries. I worked entirely in French. It's been some time since I had to do that. I work in English. I have worked in English for the past 7 years in New York, so my French is a little rusty. I apologize, but I have no fear of working in French. I know I'm able to do so.
Oh, good, brilliant. Yesterday we completed the study on C290. How would your experience in change management help with the implementation should this receive royal assent?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my experience would be very valuable. I think one of the first things to do is to make staff members feel comfortable, because typically when there is a change, staff members are very concerned about what that means for their roles and their position, what might be expected of them. So as a leader, one has to, I think, reassure people that they will have a place and that we will figure it all out together and involve them in any change management that occurs. That's critical. Involving stakeholders is also critical, but particularly changes that affect an office, one really must involve the people in the office so that they don't feel things are being done to them, but with them.
Thank you. And could you explain to Canadians why whistleblowing is important and why we need to protect a whistleblower?
Real brief answer, please.
Well, I think that if we expect integrity in the public service, we rely necessarily on those people who have access to that kind of information come forward. It may not be the only way, but it's certainly one of the main ways, and it can often be the linchpin in achieving integrity in a federal public service.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sauvage-Tremblay, welcome to OGGO. 6 minutes, please.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witness. I will ask my questions in French, but of course you have the right to answer in whichever language you'd like since we have interpretation, but maybe it could be a nice exercise for you since you seem to want to get back into it and be less rusty. Although your French sounded great. Congratulations on that. So I'm going to follow up on my colleagues' questions. You spoke of protecting whistleblowers, if you're in favor of that or not. Could you tell us more about that? Whistleblowers, that is. Yes, I think... I'm not sure I fully understood the question, actually. Sorry. Well, earlier you answered a question on the fact that you have experienced situations that involved whistleblowers. So what do you think of giving greater legal protection to these whistleblowers? Well, I don't think it can harm anyone. I'm not very familiar with all the details of this type of situation, so I would not be able to give any recommendations on the laws that should be implemented. But I do think that legal protection can do no harm and could actually be beneficial, could help those do what they need to do and to have the strength of the law to support them, to support those at the commissioner's office, for example. So you said you have some experience with this type of investigation. This seems to be what you focused on the most. What are some of the essential elements that are needed to undertake an investigation?
Je ne peux pas vous dire encore parce que je ne...
Once again, I can't really say because I don't have enough information on how the office runs, but what I've been able to see is that that this support for investigations is a challenge for the office. I think that this is something that needs to be studied more to see what can be improved upon, or to, or rather, I can't give you information on all of the different circumstances, but I would hope that the office rather, would already have the necessary resources. Thank you. And so you're going to be learning in this position. There will be a sort of training period. So who will you be consulting with first? The first people that I will be consulting with are the staff at the office, because I think that they are in the best position to know what's really going on there. And then with their support, I will identify the stakeholders, those that are involved and are in relationship with this, with our mandate, to get an idea of what their perspective is. Like I said earlier, an idea is to approach persons. I'm sorry, it's something I don't have the French word for it. Well, actually, it's the same word in French, so it's okay. So I would consult the ombudspersons, the people who work in HR, just to get an idea of the trends. Just to see how we can improve upon things to meet the public sector's needs. So your response was the ombudsperson, staff. But in this committee, we have heard from whistleblowers and experts in the field, as well as NGOs, who have been whistleblowers, would you be committed to consulting with them as well? Yes, for sure. But I understood the question as being who are the first people I would consult with. But of course, I would consult with experts as well, and I would look at best practices in other organizations. I think that we can always learn from each other. And of course, I would not limit my consultations to those two groups that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so you're saying beyond experts, you will also be looking to NGOs and whistleblowers themselves? Yes, absolutely. Great. How much time do I have left? 40 seconds? Okay. Well, that's enough for this round. Thank you.
Mr. Johns, please.
Well, thank you for being here. And just before I get started, I do want to acknowledge it's Indigenous Peoples Day, and not able to be home with the people in the community where I live is the Houpechesit and Sashat people, but I do want to acknowledge that we are doing business on the Anishinaabe and Algonquin people, and definitely want to wish a happy Indigenous Peoples Day to all Indigenous people across Canada from coast to coast to coast. Ms. Solloway, you've got quite an esteemed career, and I want to thank you for your service, serving on the International Criminal Tribunal, the International Criminal Court, the United Nations. This is extensive in terms of human rights, the work that you've done around this. There's concerns at this office. I think you know. Have you been following C-290?
I've been following it as best I can, yes.
Okay, sure. Yes. I think you can sense the concerns from the whistleblowers and the public servants that have come forward, that there is a lack of trust. They don't feel it's been safe, confidential, and independent in terms of the office. And I mean, this is an independent agent of Parliament that reports to Parliament. What are you going to do to ensure that that changes so that whistleblowers feel confident that they can come forward when there's wrongdoing?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So over the course of my career, I think you could probably say many things about me, but one of them is that I'm very due process oriented and I'm very fairness oriented. Whether one likes the outcome or doesn't like the outcome, to me it's very important that everybody's rights be protected, and that will never waver. So I think that the way in which we gain trust is to demonstrate that we are worthy of the trust, making sure that people know what they can expect if they engage with the office, making sure that they know that they can trust us not to put them in harm's way. Whether it is the whistleblower or the person who is accused, at the end of the day, it would be important for me for them to have felt that they were respected, that their rights were respected, and that they were heard. It's clear that at the end of any process such as this, some people may be happier than others. Usually nobody's quite happy. But if they are happy that they got what they could have expected from the office, which is fairness, due process, and respect, then I'm confident that we will gain the confidence of the public sector.
Do you find, like, you're aware of the results so far, like, of the previous office before you enter into it?
I've read different briefs. I read reports. I was unfortunately not able to listen to all of the debate on C-290. I regret that, but...
Aside, just like the results of convictions of those that have, you know, like in terms of whistleblowers coming forward, the results are dismal. Like, that's going to be, the outcomes are really clear. And I think if I'm working in the public service, would I dare to come forward giving the results and the outcomes so far? I wouldn't. I wouldn't even think about it. How are you going to change the confidence in the public servants so that there's real results, so that they actually see, you know, that there's someone in their corner?
Mr. Chair, it's my understanding that this office is meant to be a neutral party in the process. And it's my understanding and I mean this with all due respect, that the office shouldn't be in anybody's corner. The office needs to protect everybody's rights. And, you know, as a former defense lawyer, I'm quite well aware that sometimes people are not guilty. And I'm also aware that sometimes they're guilty and don't get found guilty. I understand that. But as a neutral entity, I regret that I don't think it would be the role of the commissioner to be in anybody's corner.
That's the right answer. So, but I would say this, who will you consult with in terms of, will you be consulting with some of the stakeholders that came forward that didn't feel that that was the case, that they felt that maybe there was a tilt to the hand of the previous commissioner? How are you going to embrace them and listen to their concerns, because they have a lot to offer?
Mr. Chairman, if anybody who has anything to offer by way of insight would be willing to speak to me, then I would be delighted to hear from them, to gain a better understanding as to how all parties to the process are reacting to and what they perceive the process to be, including its weaknesses. So absolutely, I would welcome any whistleblower or any person who had been involved in prior cases coming forward so that I could learn from their experience.
What are going to be the key factors to ensure there's a proper investigation in terms of that happens under your office?
Just a brief answer, please.
Mr. Chair, a proper investigation is a complete investigation, and that's why I alluded before to, I don't know yet whether or not 1 year is a reasonable time period to be able to do that, because I don't know all the challenges of the mechanics of the investigations. But I think that a complete investigation is the best way to do that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johns. That is our time. Ms. Solloway, that is our time. Before you go, to follow up on Mr. Savard-Tremblay's questions about what you're going to do, I would urge you, as someone who's been on this committee and was a large part of the 2017 report, I'm going to plug that, I would urge you to read the entire report and all the testimony and the testimony from C290 before you spend 1 second with the internal folks. And just to follow up Mr. Mr. Johns' comments about your comments about not being in anyone's corner, I would just urge you again to listen to the testimony of some of the victims of the retribution from the government and understand we realize you have to follow the rules, but one whistleblower against the entire strength of the government coming down on them. And I realize there's a certain neutrality that's required, but there's also a realization of one person against the unlimited resources of the government to go after someone. I just urge you with that. I thank you for your time. Colleagues, that is it for us.
Just a procedural question. Do we have to confirm? I'm asking the clerk. No. Do we have to confirm that?
No. 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 The rules is, one of the rules is to quote unquote, do nothing. So we don't know. There is a vote tonight. Oh, thanks, Ms. Solloway. I would require a motion from the floor, but it's not required.
Well, then I'd like to move a motion so we could confirm her.
Excuse me 1 moment. Just to be nice, I'm going to provide you with some wording perhaps you wish to read into the record. Oh, you wish me to get up and deliver it for you?
I'll gladly get up and come to you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, that I'd like to move the motion that the committee report the following to the House. Your committee has considered the certificate of nomination of Harriet Solloway, a nominee for the position of Public Sector Integrity Commissioner, referred on Wednesday, June 7, 2023, pursuant to Standing Order 111-1, subsection 1. Your committee has considered the proposed appointment of, as previously Council Commissioner, and reports its recommendation that she be confirmed by the House of Commons as Canada's Public Sector Integrity Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your support.
Thank you. On division, colleagues? On division. Wonderful. Now, before we break for the summer, I just want to thank all of you for your patience for me in this relatively new role for me. I want to thank our clerk for all of her outstanding work and a lot of difficult files. And of course, Ryan, who's been with us for quite a while, thank you as well. And Diane. And Diane is moving off to the Senate after today, so this will be her final analyst role with us. So thank you, Diane. I'm sorry that we won't see you back right away, but maybe in the future. And also thank you for all the support staff who have been helping us get through so much work this year. And with that, unless there's something else, colleagues, we are adjourned.